Hello and welcome to the investigation reveal of South Brook, New Jersey. This was our second location, and it's actually taken me quite a fair amount of time to get enough resources that I felt like I was going to be able to give you a good investigation. And that's mostly because South Brook and Brook are one of the oldest towns in the state. So there's an incredible amount of history that's associated with this town, and filtering through some of that took a lot of time. So let's get right into it. There's going to be 4 different topics that I'm going to talk about again in this reveal. First, we're going to talk about the Beast. Then we're going to talk about Jeffery, who was a part of the Revolutionary War and the Battle of Brook. Then we're going to talk about Sarah, the Colonial Woman. And lastly, the distressed modern man. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to give you some information first, some clips about what I first got when I first opened up to the location, which kind of took us back to what the place looked like.
That we're here, I'm getting that this was, there were no trees, and this was grass, like grassy, a lot of like marshy grass. Something is bad from the get-go here. It has to do with the water angles.
Water angles?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like where all the water connects into each other. It has to do with that. I'm getting that there is a negative entity that walks around. He is grotesque. Tall, very long legs. He's dark. You wouldn't see him like a shadow man. I don't think he's a shadow man. He's a part of like this, this was a Native American land as well, I guess, at some point. It was a Native American land, and he's a part of that as well, of just this, this is a rounded point of energy location. A lot of water comes here, a lot of water forms here, and it's like trapping. That beast is very old. Yeah, he looks like a mixture of those 3 things, like the village creature, the beast from Beauty and the Beast, and Sasquatch. But he's not a shadow person. He's like with the earth almost. Like he is like arisen from the earth, and he kind of he likes the badness. He wants this all to go on and on and on and on forever, to the detriment of what's actually here. But he does not directly harm people.
So again, let's take a step back and let's kind of get some orientation of where we actually are in the general state of New Jersey. So the map on the left, the stars where we are in South Brook, and the map on the right is the curve of South Brook at the bottom, Brook, the original town, on the left, and on the right is Middlesex. So originally South Brook was a part of Franklin Township, and then later it was changed to South Brook. So some other orienting things is you're going to see the blue line. That's the highway that I was driving when I first originally found this place, getting off the highway. And the stars where we did our investigation, you can see that small blue to the right, that's where the canal is. And then the blue on the left, that's where the Raritan River is. And that small gray line that's spanning the river there, that's the Queens Bridge that you can see starting behind us in the video. So in my research looking up information about the Beast, I didn't find anything in this town that there were any stories or rumors about people seeing this thing in the town. But what I could find is that, yes, this land was a Native American property, and it was actually a part of some of the earliest land purchases of the European settlers from the Lenape Native Americans. Some of the land that was purchased in South Brook and South Brook dated back to 1681, and that was again from the Lenape. It turns out that there was a large Lenape sachem or kingdom that was in the area, and this exact region of South Brook and Brook they called Rockakavawalabi. Again, that's very hard to say, but in Lenape, it means the round plain by the deep, crooked water. I thought that was very specific, especially since in my reading of the locations, I definitely picked up on some of the things that happened to this area are directly related to this water forces that converge in this area. And on this map on the left, you can see, again, the stars where we did our investigation. And you can see that there's the Raritan River, which is the big one on the right. And then there's this river that comes in, there's some brooks that come in, and it's all in this one area where it kind of converges. And in the image on the right, I was saying that it was very marshy in the area. Well, this is actually a diagram. Again, the stars where we were doing our location, but it looks like across the river and where those other brooks converge it was all marshy. So just another interesting aspect of this location. So what does this really have to do with the beast? Like I said, I couldn't find anything that really corroborated, in modern times that people were seeing some type of strange creature. But what I did end up looking for, there are two mythical creatures that the Lenape legends had. One is called the Mue, and the other are called the Flying Heads. They're both described as dangerous, hairy, tall, and living in the woods. And I could find a picture on the left of one artist's depiction of a flying head and an individual on the right of one artist's depiction of the Mue. The flying heads were said to be created from a violent murder, cannibalism, or primordial monster who eats humans. And the Mue is described as kind of an ice monster that was fearsome and was associated with starvation, cannibalism, and sin. Are these what I saw? I don't know. But these are two legends historically that Native Americans did believe in and were related to kinds of chaos, sin, and destruction. So then I asked myself, well, what is this Native American legends and these rivers and this chaos and this creature have to do all together? It turns out that throughout history, there have been multiple records of devastation in Bound Brook and South Bound Brook area. And this clip on the lower left-hand side is from a book, and it talks about the many misfortunes that have actually happened to this area. And mostly it talks about the historic frequent flooding that repeatedly devastates the town and the area. This article is actually a very recent article in January of 2020. There's a Bound Brook fire, and it says in the title, borough has always recovered after disaster. So that kind of made me think, oh, well, what kind of disasters does this town have? And in this article, it starts out saying that Bound Brook is a survivor. And it says time after time, the oldest town in Somerset County has managed to come back from disaster. And I was like, whoa, so this location actually does have a long-term historical history of floods, fire, destruction, which really floored me. It goes on to say we're used to these sorts of things. That's from the mayor. Floods and fatalities and disaster. And, at the bottom it says, but each time the borough managed to reinvent itself and Bound Brook will recover. So I thought that was interesting. It's this kind of energy in this location that does seem like it originates from this water, and that these water angles and water sources have kind of created this, I don't want to say a vortex, but have kind of created this locale of danger potential. So just something to think about. I don't think the beast, like I said in the video, it doesn't directly harm people. It's mostly there naturally just because of these water angles. Okay, let's now talk about Jeffery and the Revolutionary War and the Battle of Bound Brook.
Started seeing men in pairs walking. They were walking upright, very straight, upright, and they were wearing dusky blue clothing. Walking up and down. They were in pairs. They were up and down those streets over there. And I wonder if this is a soldier who wants to talk now that I'm feeling these Jeffery.
What does Jeffrey want to talk about?
So Jeffrey he has white stockings to here. He's young. He's kind of fun. So I'm getting him in wealthy clothes, but I'm not getting him as being wealthy. I don't know what that means. Like, I get like he's a farmer, but he's like in wealthy clothes and he's loving that. Like, I'm getting him in like the little black shoes, the stockings up to here, like the breeches, tan breeches, and him like kind of in like wealthy clothes, but he's not. He's nice. I like him. No beard, no facial hair.
No.
White. He was a white male. He's an American. 19.
Did he die in the battle?
Yeah, I got confirmation on that right here. So it was kind of like an adventure. He didn't regret it. It was like an adventure. Got to leave home, got to leave what he was supposed to be.
So New Jersey is a really important state during the Revolutionary War, and it's mostly because of its location between the center of the 13 colonies, and it also lies between New York City and Philadelphia. And because of this, actually, more battles were fought in New Jersey than in any other state. Typically, we think of Virginia, but actually 100 battles between the Americans and the British were fought in this state. These were both large and small battles. The town of Bound Brook and South Bound Brook are on the historical map for many reasons, but one of them is due to the Battle of Bound Brook, which was a battle in the Revolutionary War between the American Continental Army and the British forces. And what happened was, starting in the early morning of April 13th, 1777, 4,000 British and Hessian Jaeger soldiers, which were German soldiers from New York and Pennsylvania who were fighting for the British, moved into South Bound Brook and crossed the Queens Bridge to engage with the American revolutionists on the Bound Brook side. It was a total surprise attack, and there were about 500 Americans who were stationed there at the time, and they were totally taken by surprise. And that's a huge amount of British and Hessian soldiers to come up out of surprise. It's estimated that 30 to 120 American soldiers died or were taken captive during the battle, and that there were only a few, if any, German or British soldiers who were wounded and killed. The record is kind of vague, but it doesn't seem like any, if at all, of the German or British soldiers had any casualties or wounds. This battle really prompted General George Washington to decide that Bound Brook was too difficult to defend, and he then moved his troops further back north and west into the Watchung Mountains. So as you can see on this map, I'm not only going to use it for the water sources, but this is an actual map of what happened during the battle. And as you can see, where the star is where we did our reading, and the Queens Bridge is the blue line behind us. And these red arrows are showing the location of where the Hessian or British soldiers converged onto the Bound Brook side. So for the American infantry, it was the 2nd, 4th, 8th, and 10th Pennsylvania regiments. And there were also New Jersey and Connecticut militiamen that were there. You can also see in this map where the American infantry retreated to. It's that blue arrow in the top middle. So Jeffrey came to me as a 19-year-old white male looking for an adventure, and I saw him in a uniform. So it makes me think that he was not a militiaman, but that he was actually in the Continental Army. And I looked at the Continental Army records in a book of the U.S. roster of Revolutionary soldiers and sailors from 1775 to 1783. And to be honest, it's about 1,000 pages, but I looked through it. I could not find anyone with the first name of Jeffrey. I could, however, find individuals that had the last name of Jeffers or Jeffrey, and here are some images and outtakes of those pages since they were in alphabetical order, at least for the last names, but I couldn't really find one of them being at that battle. I couldn't find an individual. Not only that, of the 30 to 120 Americans that were said to have been killed or taken captive, I couldn't find a record of who those individuals were. I even looked at the cemetery records for the towns, if they had buried them after the after the battle, if they had buried them there on location. And I honestly had real trouble finding any individuals that had died in that battle on the location. What I was able to find were some examples of Pennsylvania Regiment uniforms, and one that actually struck out to me the most was the one on the right, which again had the little black shoes, the tights up to the knees, the tan pants, and a blue coat. And again, I saw them in my original walkthrough when I first experienced this place. I had individuals in dusky blue coats. I also found a study that was looking at the demographics of the Continental Army at Valley Forge. And at the time of 1777, the average age of Washington soldiers was between 20 and 25. And many of the young men did join the Army because of the adventure and the thrill, and they came from non-military or mostly farmer backgrounds. Okay, let's stay with the colonial time frame and get a refresher about Sarah.
So I'm actually getting a colonial woman, and she's telling me to leave them alone. She's telling me it's old. She said I don't know why they won't just leave them alone. She's lovely. She's like a Mother Hubbard type. Arms folded right in front of her. She's wearing like a dark blue uniform dress up to here, big bosom. Sarah. Dirty brown hair, maudlin. I'm getting the word maudlin. 50s, early 50s. Like not like the general's wife, kind of. Like a caretaker. Like she cared for not only. I feel like she was a little higher up, so like her husband might have been higher up, and she kind of cared for like the soldiers. Very caring, loving, very loving woman.
Okay, guys, this was another really tough one to pin down because instead of Jeffrey being an uncommon name at the time, Sarah is a very common name in the colonial time. And there were two Sarahs that I felt like they fit the reading. The first is named Sarah McCoy, who was the first recorded burial in Bound Brook in 1744 in the old Presbyterian cemetery. She was 51 years old at the time of her death, and there is no gravestone any longer, so her name is actually honored on this plaque here on the left. I could imagine her spirit feeling like the trouble in the area needs to stop because she has just seen so much of it for so long. The other individual that I found, which could fit a lot of the information and history of the town, is by the name of Sarah Stotts. She was born in 1787, just at the end of the colonial time, and she passed away in 1870 at the age of 83. So the age doesn't match, and the time frame of being colonial is more towards the end of the colonial time period. But we'll still continue with her story because it's very interesting and it's very tied to the history of Bound Brook. So again, I'm just going to orient us a little bit to where we were, which again is this blue star, which is where we did our reading. And the Stotts property, this is an older map, but the Stotts property is just down this road, and over to the right is this big, large property, which is where the Stotts have their house. So Sarah Stotts comes from one of the oldest Dutch families in the area, to the parents of Abraham and Margaret Stotts, who were a well-known upper middle class rural family. In 1738, the Stotts relatives purchased property in present-day South Bound Brook, where that map is, not far from where our walkthrough location was. And in 1740, the Stotts relatives built a home on the land. Now, Abraham and Margaret Stotts inhabited the home starting in 1770. They were patriots, and their home served as a meeting and housing location for generals in the Continental Army. One of them was Major General Baron von Steuben and his staff, which actually occupied the home from March 1779 to June 1779. Now, Sarah Stotts was not alive when her family was caretaking for the army, but her family did, and some of her sisters were alive. Their home over time has had multiple additions and renovations, but it is actually still standing to this day. It is a registered historic site that hosts multiple historic seminars and tours, and it can be seen in this picture on the left. The Stott children were brought up very well, and they were sent to finishing school. They were an extremely conservative Dutch family, and although there are portrait paintings of the parents, seen here, the left of Margaret and to the right is Abraham, there were no paintings of the daughters, and there are no images of Sarah Stotts that I could uncover. There is in the home in the museum, there's a small silhouette profile picture of the children's, but again, it's hard to say which is which. Once Sarah's parents died, the children began bickering over the property and family matters viciously, and they even ended up taking each other to court multiple times. Sarah Stott's husband ended up being a drunk, and they separated, but they did have one child, a daughter, together, whose first husband unfortunately was killed, possibly by a suicide. Now, Sarah's lineage was the side of the family that ultimately inherited the house, which has been in the family name for just under 200 years, but was ultimately sold out of the family name in 1935. Now, Sarah in the family was described as being the caretaker of the household slaves and the caretaker of the family's children, and she kept a detailed diary of their time, which is now kept at Rutgers for safekeeping. It does seem that she maybe feels responsible for the family and the family's well-being, and even being a caretaker for the unrested souls in the area. Now, remember I said the word maudlin? Well, that means like happy drunk, and Sarah could have been describing her husband who was a drunk, but also one of her younger sisters that died at a young age, her name was Magdalene, and it's possible that in the time of the reading that I misheard her, and she was actually saying that Magdalene was with her. Another thing that kind of connects this family to the Battle of Bound Brook and to the current energy of the location is that the annual reenactments of the Battle of South Bound Brook and Bound Brook actually end at the Stotts family home. And you can see some reenactors and actors on the right-hand side actually doing drills on the property of the family's home. I do strongly believe in reenactments and being involved in history and sharing history because history is so important. And I also do believe that doing reenactments can trap energy. And I think that's what I mostly experienced the first time I was driving through this location was just the repetitive energy of these reenactments, which is not a bad thing. It just keeps it fresh and in the energy waves. And lastly, let's look at the distressed modern man.
So what you were talking about before is I did see a gentleman over on the left side of this canal standing there staring at me. He actually seemed kind of modern. He didn't seem from old. He actually seemed kind of modern, but distressed. Like tie half undone. I could draw him. Tie half undone, a black vest, white shirt, nice pants. Almost like he just came from like his wedding, something like that. Like something super distressing. And he is just like sloppy, like drunk. This one over here, he died here. Like committed suicide or something. Like something
This beast.
bad. No. The beast is different.
The guy who can't cross.
Yeah, the guy who can't cross. That's exactly the guy who can't cross. He like can't cross.
This gentleman was the most present, pressing, and intense individual at the location. And a lot of times that will be with individuals who are more recent in time. So I was actually able to find a story in the New York Times from December 18th, 1973, of an incident where a young gentleman stabbed 3 people in his family, and then he took his sister's car and he ended up dying in a car crash. This is part of the article, and I just took out some aspects of the article that kind of matched the individual that I was seeing. There was some idea that he had been laid off recently, and he might have been under some stress because of that. There was also ruled tentatively a suicide, and it was perhaps committed under the influence of stress or possible drugs or alcohol. I do want to mention that tragedy happens in every town, in many locations. And this actually happened at the home of 159 Canal Road. That's not where his accident happened, but that's where his family and that's where he lived. And one of the reasons why I strongly believe that this individual who came up to me on my left-hand side, which is right by the canal, was because 159 Canal Road is actually almost directly across the canal of where we did our reading. So the Google house, the street view on the left is 159 Canal Road. The image in the middle is the map of the star again where we were, and the red pin is where 159 Canal Road is, which was his house that he lived in at the time. And then this is an aerial view on the right. The star again is where we were sitting doing our reading, and the red pin is 159 Canal Street. So I do strongly believe that this was the individual who came to me. A lot of times when an individual does die suddenly or pass away suddenly or unexpectedly, they sometimes have trouble crossing over. A lot of times they'll also go back to the location where they're most familiar and not necessarily stay where they passed. So it's possible that this gentleman has gone back to where his home was at the time, which is where he feels the most comfortable. So I know that this was a little bit more of a heavy location. Some places are going to be heavier, some places are going to be lighter. For example, Mountainville was a much lighter location, and this was a bit more heavy. It just has to do with the history in the area. It's not something I can control. It's not something any individual can control. It really is historically tied to the location. So I hope you enjoyed this reveal. I can't wait to get more videos going and more reveals and more walkthroughs for you. Thanks.